Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about some really interesting trends and show some data that perhaps you may not have seen before. But just kind of overall, what we're going to be talking about is some important trends that are impacting the economic development landscape. While there's certainly going to be some things that are short-term trends, today we're going to be talking about things that are long-term and incredibly impactful for suburban serving economic development organizations. This covers a wide range of places because as many locations are structured, there are urban areas that have suburban pockets, and there's some suburban areas that have some rural pockets. So there's a mix. So this is relevant for regional economic development organizations and really all types of economic developers. Hey, my name is Anatolia Ubalde. I am the co-founder and CEO of Size Up. With me today are two colleagues, Mark Marquez and Paul Terrence, who are going to be available during the Q&A to also answer some questions. Obviously, we've had one heck of a last over year, and it's created a lot of crisis, but crisis has created opportunities that is producing winners and losers. The geographic movement for millions of people, especially the higher salaried knowledge workers who are living in the United States, has been waking up in the suburbs. Then you commute into work in the center city or downtown. You spend about half of your waking hours in the city and then returning home at night. The urban centers were the places where people worked. They went out for lunch. They shop for whatever the items are that they're looking for, and where colleagues or friends would get together for happy hour before we're returning home. But COVID has changed this dynamic in a way that is not a trend, but a transition into new and long-term behavior of activities permanently moving to where people live, which is in the suburbs. Although people are working from home, they still need the products, services, and food that they were getting when they were in the central city. The difference is that now they need more of these products and services closer to where they live and less in the center city where they used to shop and eat. The pre-COVID market capacity was based on commuting workers only shopping and eating in these suburban locations a very limited amount of time, 5 weekdays and then a solid 2 weekend days. So the supply that matched the pre-COVID market is now woefully undersupplied in the new geographic economy, as workers from home are now transitioning their shopping and eating that they used to do in the center city to their suburban neighborhoods. But this really goes beyond just the shopping and the eating. This is actually about the entire infrastructure of needs you need, both for living and also for working. This is not a temporary occurrence and is instead the start of a new long-term normal. The reason for this is that the extended period of work from home caused by COVID-19 has proven the viability of remote work, not only as an alternative to the centralized office system, but also a business model that has advantages, efficiencies, and cost savings. For those that were able to produce work at home, this long-term test is likely to result in a permanent hybrid model of some weekdays working in a centralized office and some weekdays working from home to take advantage of each geographic type of work and the benefits that can be realized through them. So let's talk about what this is going to mean for the suburbs. One of the trends is that there's simply going to be more total shopping supply. This is going to be needed. For example, you think about, okay, well, office supply stores need to expand to become home office supply stores. So kind of I'm not great with these jokes, but you could think of it as Office Depot meets the Home Depot and you get Home Office Depot, which becomes a trend where some of the things that we didn't need before in the suburbs, we need more. Another trend is that empty suburban restaurants during lunch won't be so empty anymore, right? Because that was the time that everybody was outside of the suburbs in the center city at their office. But now they need this. So the whole times of when these restaurants need to provide more capacity is changing. Another change is that happy hour after work changes from spending time with colleagues after work is a time that is being spent meeting up with friends in your neighborhood. Again, you're going to have dynamics that are different in terms of what is needed. Maybe these didn't exist in the suburban areas, or it's the places that used to be empty that are now becoming filled during that time of day. Another trend is that third places become more important and economically viable with increased demand. So as you think about these third places, these are places like parks, and bookstores and cafes and bars and all sorts of places where people gather, which could be private sector or public sector. And as you think about this, some of the places that weren't that viable before automatically become important and economically viable. Another benefit is that suburbs will benefit from the capacity to offer more space. Now, this has always been something that's been there. There's been more space, but this capacity changes what the opportunities are. So let's talk about specifically things that you as economic developers can do. The first is to help enable the surge in entrepreneurship. There are strategic actions that suburban, community, and economic developers can do to maximize economic development benefits from this trend by acting now before your competition does. So there is a gap in suburban supply, which will result in the market adjusting through the opening of new businesses. And this is something that the data shows is happening. I'm going to show you some data. And what this data is looking at is it's looking at new business starts by fiscal quarter. So we normalize it so that we can see some interesting trends. One of the trends is that actually new businesses opening is, for lack of a better terminology, it's seasonal. You see that there are more businesses that start at the beginning of the year. So Q1, and you can see that in blue. Then you see Q2 in orange, Q3 in green, and Q4 in yellow. And with the exception of the recession that happened, started 2009 and into 2010, you see that consistently the first part of the year is where there is the most growth. So what I've shown you is up to the end of 2019, but what happened as COVID happened? Well, not surprisingly, in the beginning of the year, the numbers declined. But very quickly, something that we have not seen in the last 15 years, perhaps it's even longer than 15 years, but this is the data that we have federally available to us, is this massive spike in new businesses opening. It is unlike anything we've seen. And you see what happened in Q3, massive growth. Q4, another high spike. You can say, oh, it wasn't as much as Q3, but it was higher than any fiscal quarter that most of us have seen in our economic development careers. So the question you're probably asking is, okay, well, what happened this year? And the new data is out. And what I predicted was that if we followed the trends, Q1 should be huge. And it was massive. So there is a entrepreneurial movement that is happening across the entire country that you have to pay attention to because it is a huge opportunity for you. And when you look at the data by month, you can see that typically it's March is the big year followed by April, but we're looking at some of the data that's already coming in for May, and it's going to be another incredible month. Now, for the businesses and the entrepreneurs that are in your area, they may be great at the work that they do. There are many aspiring entrepreneurs who are excellent at their craft. They meet maybe great chefs or craftspeople, designers, accountants who have worked at companies for years, maybe as the top worker at that company outside of the owner. However, being good at producing a product or service is not the same thing as being good at operating a company. So aspiring entrepreneurs in your community or who are considering opening a new business, they probably don't need help knowing how to deliver their product or service. Where they need help from economic developers is to successfully learn how to do things they don't know how to do related to running a business. An intimidating statistic that's often used to scare off uncommitted entrepreneurs is the statistical failure rate of new businesses. And so let's look at them. So another type of assistance that entrepreneurs need is educational preparation as a means to reduce the new business failure rate. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about 20% of small businesses fail within their first year. By the end of the second year, 30% of businesses will have failed. And by the end of the fifth year, about half of the businesses will have failed. The business failure rate is insightful because it tells you when businesses tend to fail. 20% of businesses fail in the first year, but an additional 30% fail in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. It's just some basic math. 30% divided by 4 years equals an average of 7.5% of businesses failing each of these years. If 7.5 is a predictable or natural rate of business death, then 12.5% of businesses, 1 out of 8 of all businesses, are failing in the first year due to what Entrepreneur Magazine and Investopedia talk about is this lack of preparation in one way or another. So being better prepared than the bottom 1/8 of all businesses positions an entrepreneur for a much higher likelihood of success. This is especially important as a lack of preparation is a key part of all the 4 most common reasons that small businesses fail. If 62% of first-year businesses' failures can be mitigated through preparation, then economic developers can have an enormous impact in reducing this failure rate. It's the opportunity for the creation of structures for business sustainability. And you as economic developers can prepare entrepreneurs with the information, training, and infrastructure needed to move out of the 62.5% of first-year businesses that quickly fail. My colleague, Mark, talks about this, and I think he has a great metaphor for this that can make sense to us as economic developers. He said, if we have this field of all of our crops, and what happens is a very large proportion of those crops are failing. What are the ways that we could respond to that, right? So crops being a substitute for businesses. One way is you say, okay, well, we just need more land. We're going to go get more land and we're going to do that so we can replace, and we accept that this portion is going to fail. But there's another way. It's a more efficient way, is simply to reduce the amount that are failing. And this is what we can think about is if we fix that lack of preparation in our communities for our aspiring entrepreneurs and new businesses, we can, with our existing resources, not allow all of those business deaths to happen. I'll share with you one way that a number of communities across the US are doing that. And they are providing online services so that their local businesses and aspiring entrepreneurs can go onto the economic development website to get resources that is both industry specific, so not a generic like manufacturing or wholesale or retail, but it's unique to the actual industry they're in. Or let me put it a different way. They would say, they wouldn't think of it as saying, you're a retailer in the Northeast of the United States. They would say that you're a florist in the Back Bay neighborhood of Boston, and we can tell you some things about yourself that you don't even know. So in this case, I'll just show you an example of what the city of Dallas is doing. And this is an example that a business is going to go onto their website and say, we're a coffee shop in Dallas. And then they can enter in information that they know about their business. Or if they're a new business, they can enter in information about their projections as they're putting together their business plan. So they're not going based on their gut, but based on actually what's happening in the marketplace. So they can say, okay, we either predict we're going to make $855,000 or we're actually making that. What this software called SizeUp does is it super crunches millions of data points from the local to the national level to be able to compare this coffee shop to all others. In this case, you can see that this business outperforms those in their city, county, metro, state, and the US. And on the right side of the screen, you're seeing a heat map, which shows at the hyperlocal level, at the neighborhood, where are coffee shops doing well or poorly. Red is where they're making the most money and yellow is where they're making less. This is useful if they're thinking about opening up a new location, or perhaps they want to do a marketing campaign, or maybe they want to visit the businesses that are doing so well to figure out what they're doing in these neighborhoods that their business or their projected business may not have thought about. You can also see trends to see if an industry is growing or declining in the area. This is national to local data. They can look at the issue of salaries. Are they paying more or less than what is comparable? And unless you're in manufacturing, typically salaries is one of your highest expenses. You can also see what is common. How big are you as a small business? Because when you look at it through the lens of data, you may be a small business, but very big in your industry. Within just a few minutes, you can get this overall dashboard of the business's performance to understand how they're doing. And it's designed in a way that's so simple to understand that even a very basic or unsophisticated business can understand that green is more and red is less. They can also find and discover potential customers, suppliers, and competitors, which of course, everybody wants more customers. And what this also does is it nudges them to consider doing business locally. And as economic developers, that's how you get the positive local economic multipliers of more of the dollars staying in your community. Now, it's not forcing them to do that, but it's making them aware of the businesses that are in the area. They can also optimize their advertising so they can target. In this case, they're looking at the best places to advertise if you're a dentist based on the most underserved markets. And the businesses can optimize and create filters so they can find exactly what they want, as well as demographic information, understand their customers, their workers, and the people around the area. There are also other opportunities. There's certainly the traditional ones of SBDC, SCORE, the Veterans Business Outreach Centers, and the Women's Business Centers. These are all great resources for aspiring entrepreneurs and local businesses. And there's also online training such as edX, which provides free online training for almost anything, but also for businesses, and Udemy, which is a for-profit paid service. So businesses, education, and training from top university professors is what's available through these two options. Now, because this trend in entrepreneurship is such a powerful and perhaps once-in-a-career opportunity, economic developers in other communities are going to want to maximize the impact by getting more than their fair share by taking away the new entrepreneurship from your community. However, your economic development organization can defend the entrepreneurship in your community and likewise get more than your fair share by creating a business climate that makes it easier and better to be an entrepreneur in your community. Second trend is about helping enable the growth of existing local businesses. Now, local businesses create the highest economic multipliers in a community. Small businesses create almost all net new jobs in the USA. Most job creation in every community comes from local businesses, and the businesses in your community already have an advantage because they know your community and already operational. They just need to expand to meet the new demand. Now, we know small businesses produce half of the US gross domestic product, but locally they have a bigger impact than large businesses. This matters if you're an economic developer. We also know that multiple research reports show that the local businesses have a greater impact on your local economy through the economic impact in secondary spending. So the businesses that are owned and exist in your community, the owners, that money is not leaving your community, it's staying and it's being respent. We also know that small businesses rebound faster than large companies coming out of recessions. You can see this. This was most recently with the Great Recession. This was true not only in total job creation, but also net job creation. This is also true when you look at it in terms of the net jobs created by small businesses. From 1993 to 2015, which is the dates that the federal government has data, small businesses created 425% more net new jobs. So if you're an economic development organization and you went all in, and I'm not saying you should, but if you went all in just on small businesses, the performance you would have is more than 4x over focusing on large businesses. So there's lots of different resources that are available to address this issue. A third issue is about investing in suburban design. Now, urban design may be part of the common lexicon in architectural education, but quality suburban design and planning is a space of innovation that can be a catalyst for the right environment for suburban economic development. As more work time will occur in the suburbs, this trend toward third places, and this is what I talked about a little bit more before, will increase in demand as people seek out locations that may be used for work, but which are neither office nor home office. Cafes, bookstores, clubs, and parks will be more vital as place strategies to increase economic output and making a community a more attractive place to work and do business. Faith-based economic development may expand into new roles as third places for economic activity and incubation. Creating and nurturing the quality of third places will likely span public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Bookstores, especially private-owned local bookstores, have struggled over the last few decades. The first assault came as large national chains such as Barnes & Noble and Borders took away market share from them. This was followed with Amazon.com further taking away market share from them and putting national bookstore chains out of business. So this is interesting. Perhaps the trend toward third places for work and the need for them in the suburbs is the opportunity for small bookstores to make a comeback. While there are physical amenities that draw people to live in the suburbs, there are also urban characteristics of places that former downtown office workers like and will long for, but which may be able to be incorporated into suburban city planning. There are well-established economic benefits that come from a density of people and physical environments that can be modeled and translated into suburban environments. All of the images you see here are all suburban locations, but they have some urban amenities. Another trend and opportunity is to respond when bigger isn't big enough. Suburbs tend to have bigger yards and more home square footage and larger bedrooms. But with work from home, a two-income couple with 2 children now needs more than 3 bedrooms. They may need 3 bedrooms plus 2 home offices. During the pandemic, demand increased for 2-bedroom multifamily units where one of the bedrooms was used as a home office, according to this is research that came out of Marcus and Millichap. The suburbs are better positioned to provide extra space than center cities, but even the largeness of suburban homes may not be enough space and may therefore require alternative work options for residents, including residential expansions, residential space reuse, mixed-use modifications, and neighborhood micro-offices. Another trend is to embrace live-work. Urban zoning was the first to embrace live-work lofts as a lifestyle, as old warehouses were subdivided into residential and or work lofts, where lofts were the addition of living into a work building. The necessity of COVID-inspired work from home was the complement to this, with the addition of work to the residential building. Both have met the same and, or perhaps really in the middle, of live-work real estate. This is actually an example of a picture from Emeryville, California, a small city, but very urban that is in between kind of San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley. This is where I got my start in economic development when I worked for the city. And this was part of the trend and part of how we grew the economy is through people doing work and reusing these spaces. Now, local governments can lean into live work by legalizing it through the modification of traditional land use and zoning that prohibited the intersection of work and business, especially in distinct zones for single-family homes. While NIMBYs may not have wanted outsiders parking on their, and I'll put their in quotes, streets to visit the home offices of local residents, this type of restriction limits economic activity and incubation of home-based or geographically hybrid, meaning office and home work. Zoning and building codes may also be redesigned to translate the Silicon Valley model of starting a business in a garage into the legal ability to operate a business in a suburban garage. The argument that an individual should control access for their personal property needs to a publicly owned good, such as a public street, is contradictory to the very essence of a public good. This whole idea of parking belonging to just the people who own the property doesn't always make sense, and it certainly becomes a limitation to economic development. So this is something to consider as ways of rethinking and working with your city planners. Another trend is about facilitating the reuse of vacant real estate, because vacant real estate for business use is incredibly high as a result of COVID-19. Many businesses have permanently closed, and operating businesses have taken action to reduce their real estate footprint by creating permanent policies of work from home or hybrid work from office and home. This is also leading to some types of real estate becoming functionally obsolete as post-COVID real estate needs are different. Economic developers and their partners in local government can create new policy that enables the reuse of vacant real estate. As an example, vacant retail spaces below an apartment or condo building can be used as co-working or micro office that residents of the apartment condo building can rent for the time they are working from home as an alternative for their workspace being directly within their home. Another trend is neighborhood co-working and micro offices. Like traditional companies, co-working facilities have tended to locate in downtowns, central cities, and commercial districts. As more work occurs in the suburbs with local residents working from home, new models of co-working may emerge as an alternative that's even more local to neighborhoods. Some suburban residents won't have room for a home office or will simply want to work outside of the home where they can experience more social interaction from being around other workers, because there's too much social interaction at home and they just need to get away from their spouse or partner or children or roommate. Current local zoning may not have the flexibility to adapt to new physical business models of work. We as economic developers can collaborate with city planners to find places that can be transitioned or created to facilitate the emergence of new types and locations of workspaces, which respond to the new needs of remote and hybrid location workers. These are 2 examples of actually retail locations. And we've all seen malls are having a tough time. There's a lot that are closing, and they can be reused, or some of the spaces can be reused for businesses that are non-retail in nature. So center cities and central business districts are not dead or on the path to death. We should not trick ourselves. Previous generations of suburban flight didn't kill urban cities. The current redistribution of people and work won't either. For every person fleeing major center cities, there are young people who can't wait to take their place because this may be the first time they've ever been able to afford to live in the center city. Anybody who thinks Manhattan or Chicago, Boston, or San Francisco will be undesirable post-COVID, this is foolish. Perhaps nothing in history is as resilient as cities are. You're better off betting on cities than you are businesses. Businesses die, but cities, generally, they tend to live and reinvent themselves. And center cities will find their own post-COVID competitive advantage, which will be something new. They will need to reinvent themselves also. So as we think about, yes, this is a picture of Detroit. Detroit has seen some challenging times, and some people say, oh, Detroit is done for. That is definitely not the case. Detroit will reemerge, and it is already in the process of reinventing itself. And if we think about kind of historically, this is New York City in the 1970s. In the 70s, you might say, no, New York is done for. This is not going to be valuable. Or we look in the 1980s, this is the Lower East Side in New York City. Well, guess what? How many of us could even afford to have a residence in the Lower East Side or a home have a home there or a business there? This is not what it is. So the point is that these cities, and the research bears this out. If you haven't seen Jeffrey West's TED Talk, the trend toward urbanization is a global trend. It's not going to change. But part of that is also the suburbs. The suburbs are part of that urban trend. And every week, globally, 1 million people are moving to cities. And that's because of the advantages that places like the suburbs and urban places have. So cities, whether suburban or urban, that take action now to reposition themselves to take advantage of these new trends before other communities do, this is especially true for suburban cities that, unlike center cities, tend to have many adjacent suburban city competitors and alternatives. The folks that are taking action, they will realize larger economic development gains. And with that, I will stop and open up the conversation to any questions that may have come in, and we'll bring Mark Hayes and Paul Terrence back into the conversation. So let's start with the first question. And this question is basically asking if we could talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in terms of co-working and how that's happening in the suburbs. And I think for that one, I'm going to pass that over to Paul, because I think you have some very specific insights about that.
Well, yes. And I actually utilize a co-working space. I live in Franklin, Tennessee. And, I'm in a co-working space that's right in downtown Franklin. Most of the businesses and companies that are in there, I mean, they're small, anywhere from, 1 to 8 employees. They're typically coming from the suburbs. And, to your point, Anatolio, earlier, they want to get out of their own home space because they've got dogs, they've got children running around, their spouse is asking them at 10 o'clock in the morning what they want for dinner, and they can't be distracted, But the really unique thing that I've found, and I think it's a huge opportunity for economic developers, is when people ask me what I do, and I say I work, with chambers of commerce, with economic development organizations, they say, what's economic development? And so I have to educate them as to what economic development does, whether it be the Williamson County Chamber here where I live, or the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, downtown. And a lot of these folks don't even know that it's an option to have a relationship with their local economic developer. And, that's a huge opportunity for economic developers to educate these folks who are entrepreneurs, who are, got out of their garage and they're into a co-working space, and establish relationships with these entrepreneurs.
That's great. Thanks so much, Paul. The next question asks about where the data came from related to the growth of all these new businesses that are starting, and to talk a little bit and asking why it's urgent that economic developers focus on this now, if this is going to be the trend, or it's asking, will this be the trend going forward? So I'll answer the question about where the data came from, and then Mark, perhaps you could talk more about this issue of this trend toward new business starts and the opportunity with entrepreneurs.
Sure.
So where the data comes from, the US Census does, they're basically tracking all of the new business starts, because when businesses are going to open, they have to go and register federally as a business. So they're tracking this, and this actually super current data. And so what I showed you is up until March, but the April data is already out there. So this is very current in its federal data.
Is that it?
Yeah, that's it. That's all I got.
And then my part was what? The trends going forward? Do I suspect that it will continue?
Yeah, well, the question is why do economic developers, why should they take action now? Or is this the future forever of just incredibly new numbers of businesses opening?
Yeah, there's nothing suggesting that it's going to slow down, considering that over the last, 3 quarters that it's increased each one of them. So certainly it's something that is going to be expected in the future. And another thing worth noting is one of the things that Anatolia showed is business applications. So those are businesses that are yet to start for some of them. Some of them have started. So those are actually the businesses that right now need information the most, and they need it in the pretty near future because they're actually working through the business planning phase, but more so than just an idea because they've already paid for that license. So they're definitely going to start a business and they're going to need information literally like today. So as far as the trend goes, there's nothing suggesting that it's going to slow down. I would suggest that the fact that it's been happening while there's been mandates in most communities, well, now most of those mandates are going away, depending on where you're at. So once those go away, that's probably what most business owners are kind of thinking about before opening up, especially if you're, a restaurant or something in retail. You're certainly about to pull the trigger probably this summer. So I'd imagine we're going to see a huge uptick in new starts over this summer.
So I think part of it is unique in the fact that, well, I mean to be crass about this, but the dead have to be replaced by the new. And a lot of businesses have died. And so I think part of that is a spike, which is causing a lot of new businesses to open. But it's also, think about it, a lot of us were stuck at home for a while. And so there were people who have been dreaming about, well, living the American dream and opening up their own business. And this gave them some time to think about it and start planning for it. So I think there's going to be a new wave of entrepreneurship. We also know that that's where most of the net new jobs, a lot of the jobs are coming from brand new businesses and they're coming from older businesses. So by old, I mean businesses that started prior to 1976. But you're getting the highest number of new jobs, which I know really matters for a lot of economic developers. The most comes from the newest of all businesses. So that's an opportunity. There's also a side of entrepreneurship, which is the forced entrepreneurs, because some people they're out of work and they're trying to figure out what's their side or full-time hustle. So I think that entrepreneurship is going to be big for the future, but now is perhaps our once in a career opportunity to take advantage of this massive spike.
Well, and Anatolia, we know from data that we've, discovered over the last handful of weeks that, these entrepreneurs, 65% of them are using savings or family money to start a business. So, it's a huge opportunity. Folks have got to walk alongside these people to make sure that they are successful ultimately.
Yes. And so this is also where it's important for you to support these folks. I mean, think about it in terms of economic development. You're responsible for the whole community. And you don't want these aspiring entrepreneurs or these brand new businesses to invest all of their family money, their kids' college savings, and then go under because they didn't have the preparation. And that's a problem is these people may know how to make great pizza or they may be great accountants, but do they know what's going on in the marketplace? Do they know what is typical performance for a business like theirs? So if I am I'm some type of clothing retailer, or I'm going to open up a new burger restaurant, and I think that I'm going to make $4 million a year. Well, then my performa, everything looks good. I can afford the really expensive rent and pay the employees really high wages, but that'll put them out of business. So this is where you as economic developers can help them with the data and the resources so that they can make data-driven decisions the way that modern companies need to do it today. You saw that was the example that I showed with Dallas, but there's another question, and I'm going to pass this one also over to either one of you, but there's a question that they said, can we tell them a little bit more about the online training that's available from edX and Udemy?
Yeah, I know a little bit about both of those companies. I know that edX is free training, that it's, I don't remember who it's through, but it's university professors giving basically free college courses is what it kind of lines up like, but they're business courses that you can go onto their website and you can access that information. It's not on demand and it's not exactly what many businesses are going to need, but you'll find some very good ideas behind it. But the good news is it's free and it's there, but you might have to take a 12-week course and not be able to knock it all out on a weekend. And then Udemy, I know, is a for-profit company, and they have more specified courses, but they are a subscription-based service. So they're going to, for a few $100s a month per business, going to offer you classes, which is tough to scale as an economic developer, quite honestly. But you maybe could come up with like doing 100 subs or 50 subs to where you just had first come, first serve, or businesses of a certain type, or that are willing to go to a certain area that you might be able to sponsor those businesses for. So both good resources from what I've heard. One can get on the pricey side, which obviously we're always thinking about in economic development. And the other, it's definitely worth talking about and looking into, being free in edX.
Yeah, it does raise this issue, which I think is an important one, which is that businesses are looking for on-demand services from you as economic developers, because they're working oftentimes during or running their business during the hours that our offices are open. So they need to be able to have on-demand services through things like edX or Udemy or SizeUp. SizeUp, though, would be on your website. And so this is just the new expectation, is that people expect things on demand and that there's always a digital alternative to the personal services. There's another question that is asking about, because I'll try and summarize it because they wrote a really long one, but they're saying, well, we do economic development, and some of the things that you talked about are outside of what is traditionally economic development, some of which that falls into city planning. And here is another trend. This is bigger than just the topic of the suburbs, is in general, a big trend coming out of COVID for economic development in general is collaboration. And it's collaboration with other organizations, whether it's workforce training or public health or housing, because housing is impacting a lot of the economic development work that we're doing. But one of those is city planning. And for those of you who work in government, this is not so difficult because you can just walk across the hallway or go to a different floor in your building and work with the city planner so that they're creating policies that help enable economic development. So if we think about some of these, well, there's going to be, you may have very strict land use or zoning that doesn't easily allow, for example, the retail, which is now vacant underneath condo or apartment buildings, to be turned into office space or to be used as co-working for the people who live in the upper floors. But instead of having empty space, that could be a great solution that, by the way, is good for the economy. Or these issues related to, as I know this is the case like where I live, is that there are different rules for businesses. Like you can work from home, but if you have a home-based businesses where people are parking on the street, sometimes that's not allowed because the residents don't like that they don't have enough parking spaces for themselves. Well, I think we've got to ask ourselves, if this is a trend that more people are working from home, we need to start rethinking what the zoning and the land use and the home-based business rules are. Collaboration across economic development is going to be important. There's another question that says, what type of facilities are the greatest number of new businesses in need of? Retail, office, flex, or industrial? And I would say that we need to think, I mean, this is really a challenge, is that no matter how well we think we're going to predict about real estate, the changes and the cycles are pretty significant, right? I mean, when I started in economic development, we were all trying to create like retail lifestyle centers. And we thought that this type of office park was better than this other one. And in fact, this whole issue of having flexibility and the ability to reuse space as trends go up and down are certainly going to be more important. So I think there's going to be some of that, which is vanilla type space that can be have multiple uses, can help. Paul, I think you also had aware some research related to reuse and how that's creating some opportunities for entrepreneurs, right?
Well, yeah, I ran across a story of, two guys in the Upper East Side of New York City, and they had a bike repair shop. And we all know about rents in New York City. And you look at like global leasing, I think in 2019 was over $400 billion. And in 2020, it was about $280 billion. So obviously the pandemic, people were trying to, find activities and things to do. And, these two guys, their bicycle repair shop business was skyrocketing. And they had a specific budget number because they had to expand. They had to find a new space. They had a specific budget number that they wanted to adhere to for a monthly rent. And they ended up finding the space in the upper East Side of Manhattan and hitting their budget number. So, in terms of type of space, it really depends on the type of company, the type of opportunity. But the opportunities are out there right now for these entrepreneurs.
Right. Mark, was there anything else specifically like that you wanted to cover? Is it related to any of these topics or?
Nothing offhand other than when Paul was talking, when he mentioned like the economic developers actually going out and being the person that people think of would help them. I would actually say, since we're talking about suburban economic development, that is even way more important than when you're talking about large cities, because you're a member of the community. And last year, when it was time to go help small businesses, because that's literally what probably everybody on this call decided last year, they needed to go help small businesses. One thing I like to say is like, well, why did you? Well, probably in most cases, because you're like, there's no one else out there doing it. So even if it was not your expertise at all, we saw, EDCs that 100% did recruitment come to us and say, we have to have something to help our small businesses. And that blew my mind because these were the same people. I'm not going to name any names, but the same people that a year ago I called on them and they're like, that's not what I do. This has nothing to do with me. Somebody else is doing that. Well, when, the rubber met the road, they realized that somebody else wasn't doing it. That somebody else was just hosting dinners and golf tournaments, but not doing what the small businesses needed to be prepared for a disaster or to come out of one. So, it's that kind of puts together everything we said. Anatolia talking about collaboration with city planning, like how about collaboration with small business assistance, small collaboration with startups, with entrepreneurship, so on and so forth. There's a way now for everybody to be doing all things. And that's because we have technology, we have software. There's a reason we can do this webinar during a pandemic. Technology exists to help us do these jobs. And there's plenty of tools out there. On this call, we know of probably all of them. And I'm sure most of you have heard of something. So literally anything you need help with, you could find some software to assist you. And I'd just say you should probably largely be focusing on that so you don't need to use manpower to get these things done.
Yeah, I was trying to work really hard to be able to find some data related to what you were just talking about. And so I'm going to share that. This is very dynamic. So this is one of the trends that Mark talked about, is just how much we as economic developers changed what we're doing. Because of coronavirus, all of us realized, where is our real economy? Our real economy is our local businesses. It's the small businesses. And it was personal because these are the places that we go to get our services, where we get our taxes done, or where we pick up our pizza, or where we, all those types of things, get our haircut. And those were our friends who were losing jobs or their businesses were going out. So we as a profession have really changed what we're doing. So there's a question on the new business starts. Are there any trends by age or career stage? And so this is when we need to break away some of the fallacies. I think I think there's too much of a romanticization of the young entrepreneur. Like that it's the 20-something who starts their business in their garage that turns into Google. Yeah, like that did happen. But where you're actually seeing a lot of the new entrepreneurs are people in their 50s. These are people who have developed a lot of skills working somewhere else. And so you're seeing the older entrepreneurs is like, you cannot underestimate that. In fact, you need to focus on it. These are people with, it's their second career. It's how they're redefining themselves, and they're getting new personal value of controlling their own destiny. So it's across the board, right? But don't think that it's just the Facebook model, and don't think startup has to be tech. That's absolutely not the case. It's people who are in business services. It's people who are in hospitality. It's people who are in retail. It's people who are manufacturers, right? And it doesn't have to be the kind of manufacturing of an auto plant. It can be manufacturers of baked goods. So it can be all across. And so when you're thinking about it, don't get sucked into just the trends.
Natalia, I'll give you an example. There is a lady in my co-working space who is in her early 70s who started a ride company for elderly folks to get to their doctor. So, that's a prime example. I mean, you said 50s, this lady's in her 70s.
I'm going to answer. There's another question that comes from Jordan. Many economic developers are trained and encouraged to prioritize the recruitment and retention of, in quotes, primary jobs. It's clear that local small businesses, meaning retail, restaurants, et cetera, also contribute significantly to new jobs and injecting spending into our local economies. Can you share any additional insights or best practices on how economic developers make the case to our investors and local leadership to also add this to our priority planning and budget? This is a great question. And I think part of this is that we've gotten stuck in a tradition as economic developers that was created, and I'm not kidding, this is a century ago, which is the Mississippi model. The Mississippi model was, I'm trying to remember, it's called the Mississippi something agriculture and industry. And the idea there was that we don't have it in our community. We've got to get it from somewhere else. And our value proposition is we're cheaper and we're going to pay you, the business, to come locate here. This is from the 1920s. Well, now we're in the 2020s, and so many economic developers are still kind of a bit stuck in this model. So the first thing is to understand, and this is part of the education to your board or the elected officials, is it's becoming increasingly hard, if not impossible, to compete on price. Yes, it's true that Mississippi is still more affordable than Manhattan, but Mississippi isn't competing against Manhattan anymore. Mississippi or any of the more affordable states are competing against Southeast Asia, so Vietnam or countries in Africa or Latin America, where they'll never be more affordable, right? So that's one of the things related to costs. But specifically to your question, you've got to show them the data, show them the money. And when you do, and you look at what is creating your economy, it is the local businesses. It is the businesses. And by the way, that's net new jobs that are being created. And it's the economic activity. And unlike a model where you have to always look for the solution elsewhere, a lot of the solutions are already in your communities. And you have pipelines of talent and entrepreneurs that are coming from your local universities. And those entrepreneurs, if they're from your area, they're just less likely to go somewhere else. Because if you can recruit someone based on cost, well, somebody else can recruit them with those similar types of incentives. So I would show them the data, and we showed you the data. Actually, we have more data. If you're interested, reach out to us. We can provide you more about the value of small businesses. It's just overwhelming. There's the impact that your local and small businesses have is where your economy is. And that's why we need to change in our profession to focus on this. But data will certainly help them. And I'll give you one last one, which is there's never a downside to promoting small businesses. There are no local officials or elected officials who are like, we don't support small business. We don't care about them. But oftentimes it's lip service. Put them in a position where it's like, hey, we can really do things for the local business. And next question, I think it's going to be our final question, is there's a question related to lack of preparation and what are some of the things that entrepreneurs are not being prepared with. And I will give you, this is data that came from Investopia and also from Entrepreneur Magazine. One is financing challenges. Are they prepared? Do they have the funding that they need to be able to be successful? Second thing is poor management. Do they have the skills that they need? And we showed some of those resources that they can use to get better, whether it be go to SCORE or the SBDC or the online trainings. Another is inadequate business planning. So they don't know really what to expect. They could use services like SizeUp to be able to get data on what they should expect as a business and how other businesses in their industry are performing, and also marketing mistakes. Do they understand how to find, target, or get the customers that they need? So these are areas where you can help them with resources, whether it's coming out of your office or you're using software like SizeUp, or you're hiring or creating licenses through Udemy or the other in-person services. And by the way, thank you to all the people who put in such nice comments thanking us for the panel. We really appreciate it. We are here for you. You can reach out to Mark or Paul or me anytime. You can find us on LinkedIn, or you can find us through sizeup.com. So thank you, everybody, for attending. For those of you who are suburban economic developers, you are so well positioned. If you take this opportunity now, so that you get all of this economic activity before somebody takes yours. So we wish you the very best. Have a great day.